Welcome to the RPG Players Guild. My name is Gordon Jackson, and we're going to be talking about races today. The app I'm going to be using here throughout this series of videos is the 5e character app put out by Dungeon Developer, available at the Google Play Store. This app is really good. It has every class, every race, every background, and all the feats that are available in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. You can manage sources when you first get it and download every source book that's in the game so that you have access to all of it in one spot. If your dungeon master just wants to play through the player's handbook, you can select player's handbook only, and you're only going to be looking at races for the player's handbook. Same thing with classes. You're only going to be looking at classes that are available in the standard edition. If your DM wants to play Eberron's Rising from the Last War, and that's the campaign you're going to be playing, and that's where all of your adventures are going to be at, you can come in and all you're going to find is the stuff that's available through that source book. Very good app. So let's get started. Let's talk about Centaurs. So in Dungeons & Dragons we now have a playable race, so we can play Centaurs, and let's talk a little bit about them. So with any of these races, the first thing I like to do is let's go check out some images so that we can kind of get some inspiration about what kind of player we want, what kind of character we want to play. And with Centaurs, I don't know that there's any class that you couldn't make happen with a Centaur. You're going to be able to find, you can play just about anything with them, and I can see where they'd have great benefit depending on what you want to play. Especially with the new rules that are out from Tasha's as far as putting your ability scores where you'd like. So when we look at the stats for a Centaur, ability scores, they're going to get a +2 and a +1. And if you're using those optional rolls from Tasha's, and of all the stuff that's in Tasha's, the first sections that talk about, personalizing or customizing your character build, I really like those that are in there because it really opens up. It's not just about the ability scores. It opens it up, but you'll be able to put in, if you wanted to run that wizard, instead of putting +2 in strength and +1 in whiz, maybe you put that +2 in intelligence. Maybe you keep that +1 in wisdom. Maybe you put the +1 in dexterity, but you have that ability to customize that. Size here is medium. I watched a video with Jeremy Crawford from Wizards of the Coast, and when they developed this and set this up as a playable race, one of the things that they were really working on was this size. Because Centaurs have obviously, and especially in Dungeons & Dragons, when it originally came out, kind of drawing creatures from mythology and what we knew. And where we started with Dungeons & Dragons and these role-playing games with creatures at the very beginning to where we're at right now, things have changed throughout and trying to keep the size as medium because it really changes dynamic, especially depending on what class you are and what subclasses you are. If you're a large, then your area of effect is going to be much bigger. So trying to keep playable races as a medium. Now when we talk about size, just so you have some terminology, a withers on a horse is somewhere right around in this area right here. And then, so we've got this lower section which is up to the withers, and then we've got this top part. So typically with Centaurs, they're going to be somewhere in the 4 feet, and then their upper torso, the human portion of their torso, is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3, depending on what this is. So we're looking somewhere between 6 and 7 foot tall on average, maybe a little taller, maybe a little smaller. The thing to remember is that if you're running into Centaurs that are actually in a Centaur civilization, you could run into ones that are large, but the playable race of Centaurs is going to be medium. Your speed's going to be 40. That's a really, when we think about humans, elves, those types of races, we're in the 30. When we think about dwarves and some of the smaller races, we're in the 20. There's a couple that are in the 25, but we're in this range, and being able to move 40 is really big. Especially if you're, there's kind of like, you're at home base, which may be a village or a town or a city, and then when you're out in the wilderness trying to get to that dungeon or those ruins, and then you've got that adventure that's at the ruins, that in-between space, having, if you've got a Centaur in the party, everybody's kind of got a job. Everybody has a spot that they fit. you may be the leader at certain points, and you may be the guy who's in the back at others. And I can see a Centaur as really being a great scout. Let's talk about age. So they age at about the same rate as humans. Alignment, if it's a playable race and you're playing it, you can pick any alignment that you want, but in general, if you're running into Centaurs in the wild or you're in their civilization, they're going to tend towards neutrality. And depending on their cultural upbringing or what country they're from or what land they're from, they could be anywhere from lawful to chaotic. Size, Centaurs stand about 6 to 7 feet tall, and their equine bodies reaching about 4 feet at the withers. And depending, once again, they could have some characteristics a little bit different, just depending on where you find them. Now, here's a change. This is it's semantics, but it matters. Centaurs are your creature type, if you're a Centaur, is Fey rather than humanoid. So Fey. And that's not going to, in all cases, make a difference, but it makes a difference with some spells. So like Hold Person, Charm Person, those aren't going to work on Centaurs because those are geared towards humanoids. If you've got somebody in your party that throws Detect Good and Evil, it's not going to be able to work on humans, but it will work on this Centaur because they are listed as Fey. So some spells that talk about, undead or celestials and Fays, and they have this group, and you think, wow, that, like, what are my odds that I'm going to, it's very specific. That's something that you can use when you're dealing with Centaurs because they are listed as Fey. Now, here's the thing about, it's a time issue. Now, let's see if I can find it here. So it's a time issue depending on what books you have. Let me see if I can find it here. It's in here somewhere. In 5e, when 5e first came out, we didn't have a playable race of Centaurs. So if you look in the Dungeon Master Guide from 5e, when 5e first came out, they're going to be listed as a large monstrosity. But if you look in 4e, they're listed as a Fey. And if you look in the original Monster Manual, they're going to be listed as a large monstrosity. And so we're now using them as a playable race, and so when you're encountering Centaurs, we're going to treat them as Fey. Even though you may have an older copy of a Monster Manual, or you've got something that says that they are not Fey, we're going to treat them as Fey in the game. And so that means that there's going to be some spells that are specific to humanoids that aren't going to work against them. But there are some spells that don't work on humanoids that are now going to work because we're a Fey. Charge. If you move at least 30 feet straight towards a target and then hit them with a melee weapon attack on the same turn, you can immediately follow that attack with a bonus action, and that bonus action is making one attack against the target with your hooves. So you could rear up and you could attack them with one of your hooves as a bonus action in that, if you ran straight at them for 30 feet. Now let's talk about the damage from hooves. Your hooves are natural melee weapons, which you can use to make unarmed strikes. If you hit with them, you deal bludgeoning damage equal to 1d4 plus your strength modifier instead of the bludgeoning damage normal for unarmed strikes. And the normal bludgeoning damage for unarmed strikes is 1 plus your strength modifier. So you could potentially pick up a little bit with the 1d4. Your equine build. You count as one size larger when determining your carrying capacity and the weight you can push or drag. In addition, any climb that requires hands and feet is especially difficult for you because your equine legs. When you make such a climb, each foot of movement costs you 4 extra feet instead of the normal 1 extra foot. And I want to talk about this right here in particular. You could potentially, if you're in a party and you're a Centaur, when we talk about having mounts or having a pack animal or being able to carry off treasure or being able to carry all of the supplies that it took us to get there, you can also possibly carry one of the members of the party if you identified that somebody was setting an ambush up for you. You could use your Centaur and that party member as mobile infantry to kind of flank the enemy. Or if you were in a situation that you could jump on that centaur's back and they could help you escape. So there are some things that we can do, that you could play with that character to do that. One of the things about movement with horses, my father was a horse trainer, and I grew up with a lot, and I got a lot of experience around horses. And when horses, go on YouTube and type in horses going up a stair versus horses going down stairs. When horses are moving up something, they can involve their back legs, and it's very easy for them to move up. Now, they still have to negotiate it, and if the stairs are really narrow or the treads themselves are really small, there's still some issues there that they may have to deal with that a human might not have to deal with. But when we're going upstairs, it's much easier, especially for a horse, it's much easier to go up something than it is for them to go down. So you're going up that steep hillside and you're on a mount. It's not too bad of a deal going up, but you get at the top and then you turn around and go, hey, let's go down. I can guarantee you if the horse could talk, the horse would say, you go first and I'll follow you. And when you get to the bottom, the horse is up at the top going, dummy, I'm not going down those. It's much harder for the equine part of their body to go down something than it is to go up. So we have a rule here, but looking at it realistically, if you're going into the dungeon, it may be harder for them to go down if we were going down something for a long ways than it would be for them when on the return trip. Or likewise, if we're going up the mountain, it's going to be easier for them to get up there, but when they come down, it's going to take them a while to get down. That really would make a difference too if you were trying to escape and you're going up. They're going to be able to go up pretty fast, or faster than they can go down. Survivor. You have proficiency in one of the following skills of your choice: animal handling, medicine, nature, and survival, or survival. One of the things I like about Tasha's too is that it gives you the ability to swap out. So you can swap out a skill for another skill. And skills are a big deal because not every class, some classes can give you skills, but typically you're going to get skills from you can get skills in a variety of ways depending on your background, your race, and what class you're in. But these skills that you get and putting them where it makes sense for your backstory and the character that you're trying to build. So a lot of times you have a race like this where you're trying to be the arcanist, you're trying to be that wizard, you're trying to be that sorcerer, and you want to get proficiency in arcana. You may not be able to do that, but if you're using Tasha's Cauldron of Everything's optional rules for building characters, you can swap out a skill for a skill as long as you can, work that into your backstory and have that part of the deal. So you could swap one of these out, and that's huge. Because it's difficult to learn new skills depending on how your DM works training. And if you're doing training and you're trying to learn a new skill, every DM is going to do that different because D&D leaves it very vague, and they leave that in the hands of the DM. That's part of the DM's ability to be able to world build. Some players are not going to like that. Some DMs aren't going to like it. They're going to wish that it was just written in stone. But the reality is that it's going to change from one campaign to the next, one DM to the next. Languages you can speak, read, and write are Common and Sylvan. And once again, with the optional roles, you do have the opportunity to possibly swap that Sylvan out for something else, depending on what would be more appropriate for your character. Maybe you grew up in an area where there's lots of dwarves, and so your clan knows Dwarven very well because you deal with the dwarves. You've dealt with dwarves your entire life. I do like this race, and the thing about it is you have to look, if you want to play a Centaur, you have to expect that some things are going to be easier than others. So if you've got your three sections where you're in a city or you're in a village, you may have a harder time in the village going into things. Where they're going into that trinket shop, are you going to be able to walk into that trinket shop? Are you going to be able to get into that trinket or into that store or into that bar? Whereas when you're in the wild, you pretty much got anything you want. When you're in a dungeon setting, you may get into that section where part of the wall is collapsed and you have to climb through the water to get through to the other side so that you can continue the adventure, and everybody else in your party is able to do that, but you're not able to. I think a Centaur druid would be nice, because then you could do wild shape in order to solve some of those problems. Another thing I want to talk about with centaurs is magic items. So this is another one of those things that's really about time. So like the horseshoes of Zephyr. I went and read a bunch of articles on like horseshoes. Can centaurs use horseshoes of Zephyr, the horseshoes of speed? As a DM, I would, and as a centaur, if I was playing a centaur character, I'll tell you, horseshoes of levitation or horseshoes of featherfall would be like really, really nice items to have. And some of the conversations were like, well, if you really technically look at it, they're not considered, they're not that. And hey, here's the deal. It makes sense that a centaur could put on horseshoes of Zephyr just like a horse. It doesn't make sense that a human could use horseshoes of Zephyr. Those are designed for some type of equine, and a centaur has that equine feature. So obviously, I mean, there is some common sense in this, and you could go, well, this is the way it is. When a lot of that stuff was written, centaurs weren't a playable race, so maybe centaurs didn't have it. But I would still think, even if you encounter centaurs, you may encounter some centaur that has those shoes on. Shoeing a horse, shodding. That horse has been shod. It's a really big deal. Like if you're out in the country and the ground is soft and there's not cobblestones, it's not as big a deal for a horse to get shoed, but it is much easier on a horse, and it will help lengthen that horse's lifespan and prevent them from getting injuries if they are shod. So if they have horseshoes on. That's why blacksmiths were really popular back in the day. I mean, and that's what we think of blacksmiths and we think of them making armor. The way that they made their bread and butter was, horseshoeing was a big deal, big deal. And so having, is your centaur shod? Do they have those on there? And if you find those magical items, you could use them. I think as a DM that you could, those would be things that if I was a centaur, I would definitely be on the lookout for. And it gives your DM the opportunity to come up with unique things just for you, so that when you find that stuff, it's obvious that you're the only one that can use them. The human cleric goes, I want those. Well, dude, come on. So I really like this race. I think that if you're playing a centaur, you have to be aware of what kind of campaign that you're playing. So if you're playing outdoors a lot and you're doing that stuff, you're going to, especially if you're going indoors, you're going into a cavern, you're going into those places, you may run into challenges. And you're going to have to try and either figure out a way to get around it, or you're going to be the one that guards the equipment while everybody else is in the dungeon adventuring. So be aware of that before you start playing this race. And this is definitely a race that you want to sit down and talk to your DM about. I think if you had some ability to shape change, or if you had wild shape, or if you had something like that, that could make it a little bit easier, so that you could still get past those traps, or you could get through that adventure and play a centaur. But you're going to have to talk to your DM, and you're going to have to think ahead on some of that stuff. All right, that was a little bit on centaurs. Thanks for watching.